Welcome back. Our next guest shares the same passion as Gabo when it comes to journalism. He's reported from the most dangerous conflict zones in the world, and his works include profiles of the most iconic figures of Latin America. I speak with biographer and author Jon Lee Anderson.
During my time in Cartagena, I was able to experience firsthand the magical realism vibes of this place, from enchanting scenery to commemorative sculptures to its welcoming people. This tropical setting ignites creativity. I tried to get acquainted by trying to blend in. Now, with the appropriate attire, I'm ready to meet with another good friend of Gabo's.
I was invited to give, workshops. It's a pro bono thing, through the foundation.
Journalist Jon Lee Anderson is a board member of the Gabo Foundation, an organization that safeguards the rights of journalists.
To sort of revivify this idea of fraternity.
I don't normally start a conversation by saying, I'm really envious of you, but I'll start with, I'm really envious of you, and I think you probably know why. I read your New Yorker piece about Gabo, and it was so wonderful, and I felt like I was with you. Share the story about the first time you talked to him and just how warm and inviting he was.
Really was. Of all the many stories I've done for the New Yorker over the years, getting to know Gabo was one of the most wonderful things I've been able to do. I had recently published a book about Che Guevara, a biography of Che Guevara, and I'd recently started working for the New Yorker. This is sort of 98, 99. And I'd heard through the publishing world somehow that Gabo had liked the book. I'd never met Gabo, Garcia Marquez, and for me he was, like for most of us, he's he was a real icon and a kind of heroic figure. So I managed to, someone gave me the number of his agent. Immediately, I called him, and the first thing he said on the phone was, Anderson, I've been looking for you for ages, or I've been looking for you everywhere. He said, where are you? When can we get together? And I was like, well, and he told me that he really loved the book. He made an appointment for me to come. And he was, from the very beginning, generous, affectionate, everything, that you wouldn't expect in someone who, was not just the Nobel laureate of literature, someone for whom that distinction really fit well. Someone who had created a kind of groundbreaking literary universe 2 generations before, but also who was a political player and someone who dealt with world leaders and who world leaders sought out for just to be with him.
Jon Lee Anderson's passion for storytelling started at an early age. His mother encouraged him to write his own stories. He began his journalism career during the early 1980s in Latin America, reporting from conflict zones while profiling modern historical figures. His writings explored the nature of organized violence and the examination of power and leadership. He's the author of several books, including the bestseller Che Guevara, A Revolutionary Life, in which he unearthed the events surrounding his execution in Bolivia, which led to the discovery of his remains.
He died when I was 10, so I never obviously met him. And nor was I of the generation that had his poster on my college dorm wall, as the cliche goes. I was, 8 or 10 years too young for that, but I was aware of Che. In fact, I remember when he died. It was the first time I saw a picture of someone dead on a newspaper, on the front of a newspaper, and I couldn't understand it. And I remember asking my father about it, and he explained to me. And so I was aware of Che, but I didn't feel any particular attraction politically. I was aware of him. I read the Che's Bolivian diary when I was a teenager, etc. But the more I began to report in Latin America as a young reporter in my 20s, in the 80s, I became aware that he had left a legacy behind. So I began to meet guerrillas who, a generation on from his death, felt themselves to be trying to follow in his footsteps in the mountains of El Salvador, Colombia. And then when I went on to do a book about guerrillas around the world and living with them in different war fronts, I found that this was the same case all over the world, with people who have far different philosophies than Che, but who saw him as the archetypal warrior or guerrilla, the archetypal man or figure that they sought to emulate, irrespective of their ideals. Wherever I went, I found Che, and it began to, this period coincided with the end of the Cold War, which didn't happen overnight, as you might remember, but was happening, things were changing around the world. I approached the Cubans. They tentatively let me come on the basis of meeting his widow, and receiving her sort of, again, tentative, okay. I decided to move there with my family. I was able to meet people outside of the murk and the polarizations of the Cold War. So I had to argue in many cases that this is now history. You can talk to me, this is history. It's no longer a state secret. But I had amazing encounters with people who had never spoken in 30 years.
Wow.
Including people close to him, his widow, as she turned over the personal archives to me. And I think she saw me as a possible fair chronicler of what had been their dream of revolution, who her husband really was. And there's a lot of more to the story, and it was not easy going forward. There were those who really didn't want me to succeed in this project. But that's a different story, It's not, as you know, as a journalist, not about the process, it's about the product. And I forged on. It took me 5 years. I ended up going around the world, meeting lots of people, some thanks to her. Wow. But it was a time when I had to convince people that they needed to speak about the lives they'd lived that had been clandestine. In many cases, people had never spoken about their involvement in Che's. These were secret guerrilla expeditions. There was a lot of polarized history. Some people were worried about the interpretation that could be given to. There were conspiracy theories about why Che left, how he died, all these things. And I had to find my way through that.
There's another interesting character who's been on the world stage who's gone. And many fall into the right and the left in how they view him. But you interviewed him, Hugo Chavez. When I see videos of him, he seemed larger than life, this huge kind of character. But what was he like sitting down and interviewing him?
I realized when I met him that he was interested in me because I was the biographer of Che. The first 40 minutes of our first encounter, which was about 3 hours under a tree in the back garden of Miraflores Palace, with him drinking multiple cups of espresso. I did too, I was a real cafetero. And he smoked, which he never showed in public. It was all him asking me questions about Che.
Wow.
Yeah. He, from prison after his attempted coup, he had followed my travails in Bolivia looking for Che's body, which eventually, someone broke silence, told me, one of the generals who had been involved in the effort against Che told me where the body was buried. And there's a whole other story there, but it was followed by the press, and eventually the body was found. We found the body in the airstrip, under the airstrip of the town where he was last shown, his body. And from prison, it turned out Chavez had followed all of this assiduously. And he had something like a photographic memory. I think he was like Fidel in that way. He remembered names of people, he remembered particular stories. It was extraordinary, and this was So that had all taken place between 95 and 97. This was now 2001. So it was 6 years later, but he was now a president, etc. And he wanted me to see him as a revolutionary. He didn't say so, but it became clear to me in that encounter and subsequent encounters that he wanted me to value him or evaluate him as a figure who was analogous to Che Guevara.
Wow.
And it was extraordinary because, here he was a head of state. And yet the message he was giving me was, I'm really a revolutionary. I'm gonna really shake things up. It may not look like it, but I'm not gonna be a reformer. I'm gonna do a revolution. And he wanted me to see this again and again. So it was a curious relationship that evolved.
Anderson's curiosity to learn more about organized violence put him in the trenches of civil wars in Central America and other international conflicts in countries around the globe, such as Lebanon, Angola, and Somalia.
Guns and artillery replace civilized exchange of ideas and debate. So when that happens in a society, bloodshed becomes the combustive ingredient of politics, not ideas. This is a cliche to repeat, but it's the collapse of politics as we know it.
We know that wars are a thing that have been around for forever, as you said, but war correspondents have been chasing wars for some time. You've chased quite a few. What do you think it is that ingredient inside a journalist who wants to go and cover war?
It's very compelling to see history being made in front of your eyes, even if it's bad history. Bad history can become good history, and I think you develop a kind of feeling of responsibility when you've been in a place where people are fighting and dying. It compels you to stay there, to return there, and so, it's almost like it becomes like a moral responsibility for some. For others, it's a way of life, of course, There's shades of gray amongst us. And some people go a little dark side. But for most of us, I think it's this, it's the thrill and there's this odd feeling of responsibility when you're in a place where it's so dramatic, lives are being lost, and you're living through it too. You feel a kind of you feel a sense of belonging.
Let me ask one final question before we let you go, and that is what you posited earlier, that it's the collapse of politics, that we're not arguing, instead we've got guns and we're shooting at one another. What do you make of what happened on January 6th, and what does that tell us about the discourse in the United States, and are we headed in that direction?
Well, I feel the fact that it failed means that we've stepped away from it. I understand the dynamic of war and how I've watched it happen. I've watched political leaders break down the institutions and rule of law in countries and create conflict out of it. I've watched them create war. This shows you how powerful it is when someone who's in the driver's seat of a country, any country, can be a small or big country, repeats a message over and over again. We're all programmed to believe in our leaders. Some of us aren't. Some of us are cynics or skeptical or whatever. But a lot of people are not. They trust the leader. I think it's a primordial thing. You want to believe your leader, even if you didn't vote for him or her, because it makes life simpler. If you don't believe, it means you have doubt. Doubt is something that is deleterious and worrisome, and it makes you and your family feel insecure. Most people tend to believe what they're told.
Fascinating conversation. Can't thank you enough. Really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure.